The studio before the broadcast felt like a living organism, breathing through cables, cameras, and whispered countdowns. Every corner vibrating with restrained excitement as the red, live light waited to ignite. Rows of audience members filled the seats, a carefully curated mix of innovators, actors, journalists, and students, all chosen to reflect a future-focused generation hungry for bold ideas and bigger promises. Elon Musk sat confidently in his chair, legs crossed, shoulders relaxed, projecting the unmistakable ease of someone accustomed to commanding rooms and shaping narratives. His eyes flicked briefly toward the cameras, then toward the host, as if measuring how the conversation would bend once it began. Across from him, Keanu Reeves appeared almost out of place in his simplicity, dressed without extravagance, hands resting loosely in his lap, his presence calm in a way that felt grounding rather than passive. The contrast was striking. One man symbolizing speed, disruption, and relentless forward motion, the other embodying patience, reflection, and quiet strength. As the show went live, the host wasted no time diving into grand questions about humanity's destiny, the race toward artificial intelligence, and the cost of innovation. Elon leaned forward eagerly, his voice crisp and assured as he spoke about progress as an inevitable force that favored the daring, about how history remembered those who pushed boundaries regardless of discomfort. His words flowed rapidly, packed with certainty, metaphors of conquest and survival woven seamlessly into visions of Mars, neural networks, and a future engineered by bold minds unafraid to take control. Applause rippled through the audience, enthusiastic yet uneven, as if some clapped out of admiration while others out of habit. Keanu listened intently, eyes steady, absorbing every word without the faintest sign of impatience, his expression thoughtful rather than impressed. When Elon finished, he leaned back with a satisfied smile, confident he had set the tone, and the host turned toward Keanu, expecting a gentle counterpoint or perhaps a philosophical agreement softened with Hollywood charm. Instead, Keanu paused, and the pause itself became a statement. Seconds stretched longer than comfortable television allowed, and the audience shifted in their seats, unsure whether this was hesitation or intention. Finally, Keanu spoke, his voice calm, measured, and unhurried, cutting through the noise with surprising clarity. He said that speed without direction often led people further away from what mattered, that intelligence without empathy risked building futures no one truly wanted to live in. The room seemed to still, the hum of anticipation replaced by focused attention. Elon chuckled lightly, attempting to interject, but Keanu gently raised his hand, not sharply, not dismissively, just enough to signal that his thought wasn't complete. The gesture was subtle yet powerful, and a collective intake of breath swept through the audience as they realized they were witnessing something unscripted, something raw. Keanu continued, speaking about responsibility not as a limitation but as a form of respect, about how real progress included listening to fears as much as celebrating breakthroughs. He didn't attack Elon, didn't name him directly, yet every word felt like a mirror held up to the ideology just expressed moments before. The host hesitated, torn between steering the conversation and allowing this rare authenticity to unfold, and chose silence. Elon's expression shifted gradually, the confident smirk softening into curiosity, then into something resembling contemplation. Keanu's words carried no aggression, no need to dominate, only a steady insistence that the future belonged to everyone, not just those loud enough to claim it. As he spoke, the audience leaned forward collectively, applause forgotten, phones lowered, eyes locked on the exchange unfolding in real time. When Keanu finally finished, he didn't punctuate his statement with a dramatic flourish. He simply nodded slightly, signaling that he was done. The silence that followed was heavier than any applause, filled with reflection rather than shock. Then, slowly, people began to stand, one by one, not cheering wildly but clapping with a sense of recognition, as if something they had been feeling but couldn't articulate had finally been spoken aloud. Elon remained seated, hands resting on his knees, gaze fixed forward, and for the first time that night, he chose not to speak. The cameras captured it all, the raised hand, the thoughtful pause, the quiet response that echoed louder than any argument. And in that moment, live on air, The world watched as confidence met humility and found itself unexpectedly speechless. The moment the cameras cut away, the controlled elegance of the studio dissolved into a rush of motion and sound. Producers speaking over one another, assistants checking phones that buzzed nonstop with alerts, and technicians replaying the last minutes in disbelief as they realized what had just gone out live to millions. The energy backstage was electric but confused, like the aftermath of a thunderclap no one had predicted. Social media feeds were already flooding with clipped videos of Keanu's raised hand and his calm, steady words, captions racing to frame the moment as a victory, a shutdown, or a cultural turning point. In the middle of that chaos, Keanu Reeves walked quietly down the corridor, thanked a stagehand who held the door for him, and stepped into a small green room as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. He sat on a worn couch, the fabric slightly frayed at the edges, and took a slow sip of water, his breathing steady, his expression unchanged. There was no triumph in his posture, no sense of having won anything. A few minutes later, Elon Musk entered the room, his presence still commanding yet subtly altered, as though the confidence that usually filled every space around him had been replaced with something heavier. He dismissed his assistants with a brief nod and closed the door, leaving the two men alone in a silence that felt more honest than uncomfortable. Elon broke it first, not with defensiveness, but with a measured admission that he hadn't expected the conversation to go that way, that he was used to being challenged aggressively, not quietly. Keanu smiled faintly and said he hadn't come to challenge at all, only to share a perspective he felt was missing from many conversations about the future. Elon paced the room, hands moving as he spoke about pressure, about how public expectation turned every discussion into a performance where certainty was rewarded and doubt was punished. Keanu listened without interruption, the same attentive presence he had shown on stage, his eyes focused, his body language open. He responded by saying that being unsure was often the first step toward being responsible, that certainty without reflection could become a cage rather than a strength. The words seemed to slow Elon's pacing, and he stopped near the window, staring at his own reflection in the glass. Outside, the muffled noise of staff and crew faded as the conversation deepened, drifting from technology to the loneliness that came with always being expected to have answers. Elon admitted that silence, especially in public, felt like weakness, something the world rarely forgave. Keanu replied gently that silence could also be an invitation, a space where others were allowed to step in rather than be overwhelmed. There was no tension in the room now, only an unexpected calm, as if the clash people imagined had transformed into something closer to understanding. Elon laughed softly, not dismissively, but with the sound of someone recognizing a truth he had been avoiding. He said the moment on stage had caught him off guard not because he was contradicted, but because he was seen. Keanu nodded, acknowledging that being seen could be uncomfortable but also necessary. They spoke about legacy, about whether being remembered for brilliance mattered more than being remembered for impact. And for the first time, Elon didn't rush to define impact in terms of scale or speed. He asked quietly whether kindness truly mattered in a world driven by competition. Keanu answered that kindness wasn't the opposite of strength, but one of its purest forms. The conversation stretched on, unhurried, unrecorded, and untouched by the narratives already forming outside the door. When it finally ended, Elon reached for the handle, then paused, turning back to say that the world might need more moments where conversations slowed down instead of escalating. Keanu simply smiled, as if that had been the intention all along. As Elon left, the corridor noise rushed back in, and staff looked up anxiously, searching his face for signs of conflict, only to find something different, something quieter. Later that night, as headlines framed the exchange as a shutdown or a defeat, those inside the building knew the truth was far less dramatic and far more human. What had happened wasn't about one man silencing another, but about two very different voices finding a rare moment of stillness in a world addicted to noise. By the next morning, the moment had escaped the studio and taken on a life of its own, spreading across continents as people woke up to notifications, clips, and heated discussions that filled timelines and morning news segments. The short exchange was replayed endlessly, slowed down, analyzed frame by frame, not because of any insult or dramatic outburst, but because of what wasn't there. No shouting, no humiliation, no verbal sparring. Commentators argued over whether Keanu Reeves had truly shut down Elon Musk or whether Elon had simply chosen not to respond. But the public reaction revealed something deeper than debate. In classrooms, teachers paused lessons to show the clip as an example of respectful disagreement, asking students why the silence after Keanu's words felt so powerful. In offices, co-workers gathered around phones, some nodding in agreement, others defending ambition and speed, but almost everyone admitting the exchange felt different from the usual televised clashes. Late-night hosts joked about the raised hand becoming the most polite mic drop in history. Yet even the jokes carried an unusual tone of respect. Elon Musk posted a short message online later that day, acknowledging the conversation and thanking Keanu for the reminder that building the future came with shared responsibility, a statement that surprised even his most loyal followers. The comments section beneath it was flooded not with mockery, but with thoughtful replies, people reflecting on how rare it was to see a powerful figure publicly embrace reflection over retaliation. Keanu, meanwhile, avoided interviews and headlines, declining requests to explain or capitalize on the moment, choosing instead to remain silent, a decision that only amplified the impact of what he had already said. Weeks passed, and the clip refused to fade, resurfacing whenever discussions about technology, power, or leadership emerged. Conferences referenced it in keynote speeches, not as a viral stunt, but as a reminder that influence didn't always need volume. A tech entrepreneur admitted in an article that watching Elon pause had made him reconsider how often he dominated meetings without listening. A young filmmaker wrote that Keanu's calm presence had taught her that strength could be quiet and still command attention. Even critics who dismissed the moment as overhyped conceded that it had sparked conversations rarely seen in celebrity-driven media. The host of the show later reflected that he had witnessed something unscripted and unrepeatable, a brief window where ego stepped aside and meaning took the stage. He admitted that allowing the silence to linger had been a risk, but one that paid off by letting authenticity breathe. Over time, the narrative shifted from who won to what was learned, and that shift was perhaps the most shocking outcome of all. People began questioning not just how fast the future was arriving, but whether they were listening to one another along the way. The exchange didn't change technology overnight, didn't slow innovation or rewrite ambition, but it nudged the global conversation in a subtle yet lasting way. It reminded viewers that being right wasn't always as important as being aware, that sometimes the most powerful response wasn't domination but restraint. Somewhere between the applause and the silence, the world caught a glimpse of a different kind of authority, one rooted not in control, but in consideration. Long after the cameras stopped rolling and the headlines moved on, that calm voice and raised hand lingered in memory, proving that you didn't need to shut someone down loudly to be heard, and that occasionally, the most world-shocking response was simply the courage to speak with humility and then allow space for everyone else to think.